So Bessent has this task of not only like implementing these things that are presumably harming the markets while also trying to sue the markets and make them not freak out about the tariffs he's implementing, which is just a really tricky challenge, all while trying to, keep his eye on the dollar and, not letting the dollar drop too low.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, what's the latest with embattled and beleaguered Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook?
Big news out of D.C. today. The Justice Department actually issued some subpoenas and is officially conducting an investigation into Fed Governor Lisa Cook. She's been accused of mortgage fraud by the Trump administration, specifically Bill Pulte, the head of FHFA, and he had submitted 2 criminal referrals for 2 separate mortgage issues. And so this is a big step in the direction that this is in fact being investigated, that they're considering trying to go after criminally. So that's a huge thing. Trump fired Lisa Cook, if you'll remember, over these same accusations. She's fought back, filed a lawsuit in federal court saying that it wasn't legal, his firing of her, because he didn't have cause. And all that's playing out in the courts right now. There's been a hearing, and we're expecting more in the coming days and to see if they'll issue an injunction or like a temporary restraining order or something to prevent that firing taking place. I think most legal experts would think that that is likely to happen, and that this could end up in the Supreme Court because it's such a kind of precedent-setting case here.
Sure.
Earlier in the year, the courts ruled that essentially the president has pretty broad authority to fire heads of like independent board members of independent agencies, but in that the court specifically kind of underlined the Federal Reserve is a different case. So this is going to kind of test what they interpret that to mean.
Right, and some argue that the Federal Reserve actually has been delegated some legislative powers rather than executive, but
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just going to be a kind of a legal battle, and I think that's why you kind of expect it to end up in the Supreme Court because, as we've seen several times with the Trump administration, both first and second, these things kind of have a way to work their way all the way up to the top and, let the Supreme Court decide. And with a conservative majority, I'm sure Trump's happy about that, but it's, they've proven they can operate independently of that, and, so it's anyone's guess.
So President Trump, he's a big marketing man, and one of the larger branding exercises he undertook in this second term is characterizing the reconciliation package that extended his tax cuts, funded the border stuff, as the one big beautiful bill.
Yeah.
But now a rebrand might be in order.
Yeah, so the Republicans actually met, Republican House members met behind closed doors this week to kind of discuss this rebrand. The idea is that, if you call something one big beautiful bill, well, what does that mean? You don't even know what it is just from the name. It's one big, beautiful bill, but what's in that big, beautiful bill? So they're trying to reframe it to kind of focus on the aspects of it that poll the best, which is extending the 2017 Trump tax cuts, no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security, some of those other campaign trail promises. And so they've kind of worked out to calling it the working families tax cuts is kind of their newest push. And there's different permutations of that sort of phrase, but you're hearing a lot more about working families in the tax cuts aspect of the legislation on Capitol Hill. A lot of lawmakers I talked to yesterday seem to be like the rebrand. They thought it was a good idea. A lot of them were like, we like the whole thing, yes, but this is what we need to focus on because that's what they say does the best with voters. And if you remember back in 2017, speaking of Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that never ended up really polling very well, even though, it's even in the name Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So I think they're going to try to, recapture some of that momentum they might have lost in the August recess and kind of focus on reframing this legislation in more favorable terms because, as we know, it's really important to do so for Republicans heading into the midterms. It's their biggest legislative, package that they've had during the Trump administration. Right. I think you're going to see a lot more talk of kind of emphasizing those positive parts of the bill.
Yeah, it's interesting because the bill was really named originally not because of its contents, but because of a process dispute over whether this should all be done in one or two bills.
Yeah, exactly. And at first they wanted, the Senate side, John Thune really wanted 2 bills to do tax cuts in one and then all the other priorities in the other. House, Mike Johnson and the House folks, they really wanted one because they didn't think they'd be able to get a lot of the stuff passed without them combined.
Right.
House side ended up winning out, and a lot of people thought it would fall apart and that it would get split down, after months of negotiations, split into another bill. But defying the odds, Mike Johnson was able to get it through the finish line, even with the tight margins, and signed into law on the 4th of July. So big achievement, feather in his cap. I think that now the whole point of this is kind of messaging against the Democrats who have accused Republicans of, cutting Medicaid by adding work requirements to it, accused them of, catering to the wealthy instead of the working class. So I think working families tax cut kind of is evidence of the Republicans trying to recapture some of those votes for the midterms.
So, Zach, you've written a story talking about a little bit of a tightrope that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has to walk.
Yes.
What are you talking about there?
Well, a lot of people I spoke to says they would not envy him and do not want to have his job because he has a very tough job right now, and that's because Trump is started with the biggest tariff increase in decades, and Bessent is largely in charge of implementing that along with Commerce Secretary Lutnick. So he's kind of the driving force trying to implement those tariffs, while at the same time the markets don't like tariffs. They never have. And you saw quote-unquote Liberation Day when that happened back in April, I believe, and all these tariffs were announced. Markets tanked. Since then, they've kind of rebuilt some of those losses, recouped those losses. But as these tariffs remain in place and as it kind of winds its way through the courts, there's concerns that if they're allowed to stay in place, they'll start to damage the markets even further. I think that's kind of evidenced by the dollar. The value of the dollar has actually fallen since the start of the year, pretty notably fallen since the start of the year from where it was before Trump entered office. And that's kind of indication that, people are kind of freaked out about the state of the economy and, what could be down the road. So Bessent has this task of not only implementing these things that are presumably harming the markets while also trying to sue the markets and make them not freak out about the tariffs he's implementing, which is just a really tricky challenge, all while trying to, keep his eye on the dollar and, not letting the dollar drop too low and, that sort of thing.
Got to keep the eye on the dollar.
Yep.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.